many of the policies would do what they call endow at age 100. So at age 100, the policy would just pay out. It would pay the death claim. So if you're lucky enough to live to 100, you get screw your kids.
The thing that I find interesting is you came at this through the lens of sort of understanding why people die, not through the lens of longevity, which is sort of like you were trying to like help companies save money by understanding what was causing death and mortality and trying to help them navigate that. So can you tell us about your background, how you got like the insights about the nature of our chronic disease epidemic, what's going on, why these insurance companies have all this data, what they've learned, and why it matters to us?
So for the better part of my career, I was a mortality expert, which essentially means that, we studied mortality, the variable basic tables, not just putting people on an actuarial curve, right? I mean, we're all on one, right? If you're a 54-year-old male, you have a life expectancy of X. If you're a 34-year-old female, you have a life expectancy of Y. You're lumped into a massive pool of mortality. But when a life insurance company is getting ready to put $25 million or $50 million worth of risk on your life, or an annuity company is getting ready to issue you a SPIA, what's called a single premium immediate annuity, where you give them a lump sum of cash and they guarantee you an income stream for life. Or you're getting ready to do what's called a reverse mortgage, which means you get to live in your house, but you sell it while you're still alive. All of these are based on mortality. The only thing that matters in those financial services instruments is how many more months does this person have left on Earth?
Right.
So they don't really care where you are on an actuarial curve, right? They want to know
They don't adjust the prices to match when you're going to die, so they don't lose money.
And insurance is priced like that. You have super preferred, standard. Then you have what's called table ratings.
So what did you learn as you sort of started looking at the data and the lab data for people who were in the pool? Because these companies actually get your blood. Like
they get your blood, they can take genes, they get all of your medical records, they have all your demographic data. They know, it's a proctology exam. I mean, if you've ever applied for
maybe a full colonoscope.
Yeah, I don't think you get as much information from a colonoscope as you do a full-blown life insurance application. Now, I'm not talking about term life insurance. I'm talking about real whole life, permanent universal life insurance, where people are putting 10 million, 25 million, 50 million of risk on a single life. What happens in those cases is they take not only a deep dive into your demographic data, but I mean, they get everything: your divorce decrees, your trust accounts, your bank statements, your brokerage statements, your work history, and all of your medical records. Yeah. And then before they actually issue the policy, they will essentially send a nurse to your house and they will pull whatever biomarker they want.
So you got to have an inside view of what that is.
Real inside view. I'm first of all, I'm not a physician. I'm a human biologist. My undergraduate degrees are in biology. My postgraduate degrees are in human biology. And so I spent 8 years in formal education just studying human physiology. And they wanted someone like that on the team with the rest of the MDs and actuarial scientists, because we were trying to really build a model that was very accurate, probabilistic model that was accurate. What really emerged from this big data, I always say that if this database could see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity.
Yeah.
It would...
Spill the beans, Gary.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Well, I wish I had secretly downloaded it, like one of those government conspiracies, and I had it on a flash drive, because trust me, I would put it in the public domain. Probably go to prison for the rest of my life, but I would get it out there. So I do my best to get it out there with what I've got in my head. But the very unpopular information that emerged from this, or I shouldn't say unpopular, I should say anti-mainstream, was that the reason why the majority of people are not living healthier, happier, longer, more fulfilling lives were because of what we called modifiable risk factors. Right? There were the non-modifiable factors, and then there were the modifiable factors. You could have a restricted range of motion from a massive injury or surgical procedure. That's not modifiable. You have spinal rods in your back. Those are not modifiable risk factors. Modifiable risk factors were diet, lifestyle, supplementation, exercise, mobility, and in my case, I would add to that significant changes in your blood biomarkers.
Yeah.
And so what we noticed was that the reason why we were table rating a lot of these, and the reason why we were shortening the life expectancy, was because of the intervention of chemicals, synthetics, and pharmaceuticals. And the more pharmaceuticals you were on, the easier it was for us to predict your life expectancy.
The more you were on, the more likely you were to die sooner?
The more you're on, the more likely you were to die sooner, and the more predictable. Because not only could we predict the onset of other conditions, but we could predict the severity of and how quickly you would succumb to them. And so we
You
realized
could tell almost to the month when someone's going to die based on the data.
to the month. Yeah. And it's a very accurate model. And I get a lot of flack for that because people say, well, if you could predict life expectancy to the month, which I don't do anymore, that, you would be Jesus or you would have won a Nobel Prize. And I've never won a Nobel Prize and I'm not Jesus. So I believe in Jesus. And the reason why, they say that is because they don't realize how accurate this science is. But if you want to know how accurate life insurance companies are, annuity companies are at predicting death, just look at what happened during the 2008-2009 financial services crisis. We had 364 banks fail. You didn't have a single life insurance company fail. In fact, some of the largest institutions, AIG, whose credit derivatives division was taking the company under, were bailed out by the life insurance.
Yeah.
They are some of the most solvent institutions on the planet. Yeah. They're some of the highest rated financial institutions on the planet.
Because they know shit.
They know shit. They're really
They know how to
good.
manage the risk because they understand the biology.
Yeah.
So the things that came up were modifiable things, and they were things you could see on blood work. That you could see by their.
You could absolutely see it on blood work. So things like.
What were you looking at?
So we looked at three main areas, and when we would look through your blood work, we would look at glycemic control, how well you controlled your blood sugar over a lifetime, because we saw that hyperinsulinemia, elevated hemoglobin A1C, and poor glycemic control was a risk factor. It was what we called a comorbidity.
So were the insurance companies measuring insulin?
They were measuring insulin, glucose, and hemoglobin A1C.
Okay, that's amazing because, Gary, less than 1% of all lab tests in America done by physicians include an insulin level, which is probably one of the most important biomarkers for longevity and risk.
No question.
And it's something we use as a core part of Function Health in our offerings. Company I co-founded to help people understand their own lab data because it's so critical. And it's amazing to me that the people who know how to manage risk are actually measuring it and not doctors.
What's interesting is you would get 15, 18, or 20 years of medical records on someone, and you would see the atherosclerotic, the arteriosclerotic issues, you would see the cardiovascular disease, you'd see the very, very, very low levels of statin-controlled LDL cholesterol, but you would see extreme proliferation in cardiovascular disease. You would see early mortality in these groups because of what they called non-correlated events, hormonal events, what our scientific team drew back to cell wall, cell membrane dysfunction, early onset, not just early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, but all forms of cognitive decline. We knew, for example, that LDL cholesterol, for example, was not a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
That's a big statement.
Yeah, and that is a material fact, by the way.
Because the insurance companies are not selling statins, so
no,
they're not actually.
No,
they're actually looking at what data is the most relevant, and LDL is a factor, but it's not by itself the factor. It's really metabolic health, which you measure by looking at insulin and blood sugar and A1C and
like we wanted to see,
number.
what was the chance that this person would have LDL cholesterol called to the arterial wall? Not in what was the presence of LDL cholesterol. If they were hyperinsulinemic, then they had significantly higher incidence of plaquing, scarring, narrowing, and other forms of cardiovascular disease. But the centenarians, not once in my entire career, and I don't know that this, I'm not saying this is a blanket statement, but in my career, we processed death claims too, and we didn't see a single death claim on a centenarian, someone that lived to age 100. At that time, many of the policies would do what they call endow at age 100. So at age 100, the policy would just pay out. It would pay the death claim. So if you're lucky enough to live to 100, you could screw your kids. Be like, I just got my $20 million life insurance policy.
The person who's still alive gets his life insurance.
Person that's still alive.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And there are other things called accelerated death claims, where they would actually accelerate the payout while the person was alive if they had a terminal illness.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is I didn't process a single death claim on a centenarian, not one, who lived at over age 100 that did not have clinically elevated levels of LDL cholesterol at the time of their death.
If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.